behind the scenes of Dishonored, the first story in my book, Alengrid Nights. When I first started writing the Hammertown stories, I published on a site called Smashwords, and I posted my first story, which was There Shouldn't Be Elves in Hammertown, and I got 2 really good reviews off of that. But they mentioned, both reviews mentioned a character that I had in that story. And it wasn't Sebastian Locke, it was Oren Van Dorn. And they both talked of his speech and his mannerisms and different things. But so I had to kind of explain why Oren Van Dorn was a disgraced member of the Phoenix Guard and why he was in Hammertown in particular. A dwarf with his skills and his abilities. Why are they not using him on the front lines? You know, that kind of thing. But Oren Van Dorn is actually was created by a friend of mine named James Bryant, and we used to play Dungeons and Dragons together, and Oren Van Dorn was his character, and he brought him to life with personality and just his character was unique, and it made everything fun. Playing off of his character made a lot of the dull parts of our games actually more enjoyable. But so when I started writing, I asked him and several other of our group there if they cared if I included their characters in my stories, even though it was going to be steampunk stories and not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons setup. And they said yes. So Oren Van Dorn, captain of the watch, member of the Phoenix Guard, or ex-member of the Phoenix Guard, that's how he came about being. And Dishonored tells the story of how he got to Hammertown and what his main mission is. So, enjoy. Dishonored by S.P.Dorning. First story in Alengrid Nights. Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising rain later on that day as Oren Van Dorn made his way to the Phoenix Guard's 5th Regimental Assembly Tent. His stride was quick and showed the confidence of a dwarf that had been in the military for a long time. There were times when he wondered if there was anything else to life besides the military. He knew there were other places where the war was a distant threat and life was the normal everyday humdrum that it had always been, but it seemed foreign to him. His life before was a dim memory. The bloody conflict between the Elven nation and the Dwarven kingdom had raged long before he had earned the right to wear the steam-powered armor of the Phoenix Guard. In fact, it had raged for as long as he could remember. Oren couldn't quite remember how it had started, but he knew why it continued. The elves themselves, or the elves thought of themselves as the master race. To them, a perfect world would only contain elves, and they were making a grand effort at bringing the perfect world into being. Every day seemed to find the dwarves retreating little by little, grudgingly giving ground under the onslaught that was the elves. The dwarves made them earn what they took, but they were still taking it. Another peal of thunder sounded as he entered the shade of the assembly tent. Other soldiers were arriving, and they all formed ranks, preparing to receive instructions for the day. "Listen up!" The commander was a grizzled old dwarf with more gray in his beard than black. His skin was dark with the tan of someone who had been in the sun-blasted trenches of the treeless plains a long time. Someone who had spent a lifetime fighting the elves so their kinfolk could remain safe in the caves of their homeland. His name was Thanto Visal, but everybody under his command just called him Crank. Only in whispered conversation, though. "We've been ordered to make another strategic withdrawal. The elves have taken the Hissel Pass. They are currently northeast of our position and headed our way. We need to stall them to give the Thundermakers time to get their gear and fall back to the next barricade. It should only take about 2 days. I know we're spread thin, but we need to hold them for 2 days. If they get past us, they can wreak havoc on our supply lines. Fighting on stale biscuits is tough, but believe me, boys, fighting on no biscuits is worse. Pick up your individual assignments from your duty officers. The rain finally came, beating down on Orrin's helmet and puddling in the low spots of the crumbling building he had chosen as a bolt hole. The sound of it echoed inside the steam armor, giving the illusion of a fierce storm instead of the steady downpour that it was. Orrin peered out, watching the courtyard in front of him, with intense concentration. He had seen movement. Of that he was certain. He just didn't have an exact position. The elves that they had been fighting in this particular area of Arengar hadn't used any invisibility spells, but that didn't mean they didn't have any. Orrin had picked this building for cover because it overlooked the empty courtyard, giving him a good kill zone. The cobblestone road was the only way for anyone to get through with equipment of any size. That meant the elven troops would more than likely come through here. It was possible that the movement he had caught out of the corner of his eye was a scout. He kept the boiler pack that was powering his armor at low fire, barely enough to run the servos required to move, but he could bring it up to full readiness in just a few moments. The uneasy feeling that was creeping around the nape of his neck persisted, giving him the premonition of a trap waiting to be sprung. He glanced down at his weapon gauntlets and back up again just in time to see the flash of movement again. Bloody devils and bloody magic, he whispered, spitting between the bars of his faceplate as if the words had left a bad taste in his mouth. An elf appeared below in the courtyard, as if summoned by Orrin's whispered curse. A male elf standing about almost 6 feet tall, dressed in plain traveling cloak and clothing. 2 bandoliers of pouches crisscrossed his chest, and a courier's satchel hung by his left hip. A canvas backpack was slung across his shoulders, and his knee-high black boots appeared to be made for comfort when walking long distances rather than the government-issued ones that most elven scouts wore. That was enough to cause Orrin to hesitate in firing, but not enough to keep him from aiming the chain gun mounted on his right gauntlet in the elf's general direction. There was something off about this character, besides his clothes, but Orrin couldn't quite put his finger on it. The elf scurried from cover to cover, making his way across the courtyard, and Orrin tracked him with his chain gun barrel all the way. When the elf was halfway across, he managed to figure out what was different. The runes that were tattooed on the elf's face and clothes were glowing with a soft white light, as opposed to the angry red that the others he had fought wore. Orrin wasn't sure if it was significant, but he made a mental note to ask around when he got back to base camp. Bracing himself for the recoil, he pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. Twice more he tried to fire, and was rewarded with nothing more than the clicking of the jammed feed belt. Cursing, he cranked the manual feed handle, backing the chain up to free the track. The mechanism loading the ammo into the firing chamber had been bent in a fight with an elf wearing scorpion armor. He had thought that he had straightened it out sufficiently for it to work. Apparently, he had been wrong. Dropping back into cover, he worked the misaligned chain, trying to free it, the elf halfway forgotten in the back of his mind. Gnomish engineering, coupled with dwarven craftsmanship, could produce some wondrous equipment. Unfortunately, some of the tech they issued the Phoenix Guard required precision alignment and could be a little touchy. Once something was bent, it was almost impossible to realign in the field. He knew he was going to have to strip it down and try and fix it again this afternoon. It looked like the pin holding that particular link in place had worked itself out, jamming against the housing of the loading breech. He lifted up on the link and tried to get it in a better position to push it back into place. With a twang, it jumped out of the link, vanishing into the rubble at his feet. With nothing to keep it in place, the chain slid free, and Orrin cursed again as he stood there holding the useless piece of junk. The crackle and pop of electricity was his only warning as 3 energy blasts from an elven Wendigo model armor exploded around him. Reflexes took over and he dodged to his left, putting a pile of broken bricks between him and the new arrival. Two more blasts exploded in front of him, this time from the opposite side of the building as an elven corsair appeared. They must have spotted him and split up for an ambush. Now they had him in the crossfire. "That'd be just perfect," he grumbled to himself under his breath. Dropping the useless ammo chain, he launched himself at his nearest attacker. The wall collapsed under the impact from his steam-powered armor as Orin drove the Wendigo into it. His gauntleted fist cannoned into it, boosted by the servo in his armor. Orin was strong enough to break trees with his fist. With the extra power from the servo assist, he could break boulders. He hammered at the Wendigo faceplate, knowing he had to take one of them down fast. A crack appeared in the seam where the two of the armored plates met, and Orin focused the brunt of his assault there. The Wendigo tried unsuccessfully to block Orin's attack as another energy blast exploded against the wall behind them, peppering them both with concrete shrapnel. Orin jammed the barrel of his steam jet into the crack he had managed to open in the Wendigo's helmet and triggered the weapon. The elven warrior screamed as he was cooked alive inside the shell of his armor. The Wendigo bucked and kicked, flinging Orin off just as the Corsair came in firing. Energy slugs slammed into the Wendigo where Orin had straddled it just a few moments before. As the metal turned to slag under the magical energy, the screams from inside the armor stopped. The low water alarm bell sounded in Orin's armor, nearly deafening him. The low water alarm bell sounded in Orin's armor, nearly deafening him. He must have pinched a coolant line or sprung a leak somewhere. His boiler pack had dropped into the reserve tanks. That left him without his steam jet or his chain gun. Picking up a chunk of the rubble that was strewn about, he flung it at the faceplate of the elven Corsair. The elf inside knew the projectile couldn't hurt him through his suit, but its reflex is to flinch when something is thrown at your face. The Corsair jerked to the side, and Orin charged into it, making the fight close quarters where he would at least have a chance, or so he thought. As his first punch connected, lightning flared. All of his display bulbs exploded at once as electricity shot through his suit. Glass shrapnel stung his face and blood mixed with the sweat running down his cheek. The discharge had flung him sideways, and he had landed face down with his back to the Corsair. Blinking away the dirt and sweat, he tried to roll over. Everything seemed so sluggish. With a creak and a groan, the armor finally passed the pivot point where the weight he had been pushing against was now pulling him along. He flopped over with a clang. Rain poured down into his open faceplate from a missing section in the roof, and Orin began to laugh uncontrollably. "All this just to drown!" He continued trying to sit up, even though he knew there was no way he would have time to do anything. Any moment the Corsair was going to end his life. But the end didn't come. Orin clambered to his feet to find the Corsair aiming its deadly energy slug gauntlets at him. It stood, unmoving, surrounded by a white nimbus of light. The light grew brighter, and Orin became aware of the sound of metal groaning under pressure. Suddenly, the Corsair armor collapsed in on itself with the sound of tortured metal. The light vanished, leaving nothing but a twisted, smoldering hole, leaking blood all over the floor. The elven pilot never even had a chance to scream. At first, Orin just stood there, not quite sure what had happened. Then the elven scout he had seen earlier stepped out from behind the Corsair's remains. The white nimbus glow was fading from his hands, and he looked as haggard as Orin felt. It took Orin a moment to realize the elf was speaking to him. He had heard the elven language before, but he couldn't understand what the elf was saying. It was just meaningless jabber, and he said as much. "I am sorry, my common speech is very rusty. I said, are you all right?" "What? Yes?" Orin stuttered. He had been saved by an elf. "I think that group had been sent to intercept me. They just found you by accident. I am a friend to those who oppose the present elven regime. That is all I can say for now. The conversation was interrupted by the pop of gunfire. Blood exploded from the elf's shoulder, and several red flowers blossomed across his chest. The elf jerked like a marionette with its strings tangled and fell into a heap at Orin's feet.
Hold your fire!
Orrin bellowed as a dwarven musketeer dropped through the missing section of the roof. Two more came from the opening behind him.
Sir, I'll have to ask you to power down your armor.
The musketeer that spoke aimed his rifle at the open faceplate to emphasize his request.
What? Are you out of your bloody skull?
You were found talking with the enemy, sir. I have to place you under arrest.
You ought to just kill him,
one of the other two said.
No, we'll take him back to Crank. Let him decide what to do.
All three of the musketeers were glaring daggers at Orrin. He knew there was no use in talking. They weren't listening.
I know you don't believe me, but I'd be innocent of any wrongdoing.
Orrin powered his boulder pack down. Two of the dwarves helped him out of it, while the third held a rifle on him at all times.
That elf just saved me life, and he was about to tell me why when you plugged him. I don't care.
Tell it to Crank.
At least bring the body. It'll help prove my story out.
We don't have time to lug a dead elf halfway to HQ.
Then bring his stuff.
Orrin despaired, thinking the musketeers were going to reject even that suggestion, but the leader finally nodded in agreement.
Sam, you collect the elf's belongings. I'll watch the prisoner. Jeb, you walk the armor back. Think you can handle it?
As long as I don't have to do nothing but walk, Jeb nodded.
Let's get to it then. We have a good ways to go.
They led Orrin into the commander's tent, still shackled by wrist and ankle. He was escorted to the solitary chair in the center of the tent and forced to sit. Commander Fanto Visal sat behind the desk, absorbed in the report in front of him. His face was blank and unreadable as he looked over the gold-rimmed spectacles at Orrin. The investigation had been done quietly. It was beyond imagination that a dwarf would be helping the elven nation, much less a phoenix guard.
Do you realize what a stir you've created, soldier? I did not ask the bloody elf to save me.
Still sticking with your story, eh?
'Tis the truth, Orrin spit, regardless of what anybody says.
Leave us. Commander Vassal waited for the guards to file out before sighing and taking his spectacles off. He closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, holding that position almost long enough for Orrin to think he had fallen asleep.
Your story checks out. We recovered some documents from the elf courier's bag that bear out your story. Then take these bloody chains off of me.
Calm down, soldier.
I have a proposition for you first. You see, now we have a slight problem, and you're in a unique position to help us, son.
What problem? We know that supposedly there is a faction of elves that don't agree with what their government is doing. We know that they may be ready to join our cause. We just don't know where they are or how to contact them.
Supposedly?
It could all be some sort of elaborate trap. We're not sure yet. We've had some gnomish intelligence agency deciphering the documents that the scout of yours was carrying. So far, it hasn't given us many leads.
Begging your pardon, sir, but I still don't know where I can help.
One of the documents had a map. There was several locations marked on it. They seem to be very important, but we don't know why just yet. You're still a poor and without a mug, sir. The higher-ups want you to go out on special assignment for them.
Meaning?
Meaning you go covert, a stealth operation. The trial goes through as a cover story. With all the rumors floating around, no one will question it. You'll be offered amnesty in return for your resignation, only on paper. And then what? Then we ship you out to one of the locations on that map. You'll be stationed there without anyone's knowledge. You'll work independently of the military. I've seen your record. You're qualified for this, son. The higher-ups believe that your elven scout was going to these locations for reasons that may be extremely important to the future of the war. If there is an elven underground, it wouldn't hurt for us to have a bargaining chip on the table. You're to go there and investigate anything you deem might be important of an elven resistance.
If you find anything, take appropriate measures to secure it and report back to us."
Warren was quiet while he thought over the implications. He would be leaving the Phoenix Guard in disgrace, dishonored, even if only on paper. That would be a heavy burden to bear. He wouldn't be able to tell anyone. His brothers in arms would spit on his name. Could he handle that for the greater good of the Dwarven Kingdom? Commander Viso could see he was struggling with the decision.
"I know where your loyalties lie, son. But just think of what the might of the Dwarven military would be backed up by elven magic. It could turn the tide of the war. We might actually be able to go on the offensive and take the fight to them."
He knew the commander was right. It was still a lot to ask of one soldier.
"If and I do this, where will I be going?"
"I can't tell you that unless you accept the mission.
Sorry." "Fine. I'll do what I can, sir." "I knew we could count on you, son. Your new assignment will be a long way from the front line. It's a small dwarven city, but it is civilization. You're going to be the next captain of the watch in a little place called Hammertown."